Millions of people are repeatedly taking to the streets of Hong Kong to express their wish to remain autonomous of China. Throughout June, a grassroots movement has united the masses against China's efforts to increase its influence over Hong Kong's government. This Just Saying will examine how a proposed extradition bill can frighten so many law-abiding citizens into taking action in what some describe as life or death protests. Hello there, Just Sayers. Is that a thing? Just Sayers? Maybe it could be a thing. I have missed you. You know how it seems like sometimes life is conspiring to keep you from doing what you were supposed to do? I feel like that. I want to thank you for joining me on this journey that I embarked on a year ago, actually. I am going to revisit that, I think, in the next episode. I'm going to go back and do some updates on the things we've already covered because a lot has happened. There's a lot happening. Lots going on. But that's a tease. Before we get to that, we have to talk about what we're supposed to be talking about today. Today, we're going to talk about Hong Kong. That's what we're here to talk about. And the protests that are going on there and the civil disobedience that's happening because, oh man, it's something. Hong Kong is in the midst of the most massive protests in its history. Given the numbers involved, the demonstrations have so far been amazingly orderly and peaceful. During the largest gatherings, there has been virtually no vandalism. No one is breaking windows or setting cars on fire. Though a few bricks and bottles have been thrown, protesters are far more likely to repurpose barricades to block off streets and hinder police movements than they are to do any permanent damage to buildings, structures, other people. That's just not how they're rolling. However, demonstrators who refuse to disperse on command has led police to use tear gas and other non-lethal methods of crowd disbursement, including non-lethal bullets. But it's really been pretty amazing. If you have not seen any of the footage of these marches, you need to go to justsaying.com right now and view some. That's GISTSAYN.com. As always, there is an accompanying article on the website which links to source material concerning the topics of discussion. And I've also put some videos embedded into the article so you can actually see what's going on. Pause if you need to. It's okay. I'll wait. That's the beauty of a podcast, right? So go ahead. I mean, really. They're amazing, right? The images of some 2 million people moving methodically through the streets of Hong Kong to peacefully surround buildings which house the territory's government are mind-blowing. The ebb and flow of their motions are fluid and calm. At one point, they part like the Red Sea to allow an ambulance and a row of buses to pass. That's something you don't really see in the protest movements that we have here in the United States. I'll tell you a little bit more maybe why that is in a bit. But first, though this is sparked by a proposed bill working its way through the Hong Kong legislature, what fuels the protests is something much bigger. If the measure before the legislature passes, Hong Kong's government would be allowed to consider extradition requests from jurisdictions where they have no prior agreements. The most notable and concerning of these places is China. In an interview with the BBC, Ansong Cheng, a former Hong Kong chief secretary from the era when Britain was still in charge, said, quote, "You're taking away everyone's personal freedoms. At least up till now, most people feel they were safe in their own beds. But once these extradition proposals are passed, no one is safe." Unquote. The Fugitive Offender Ordinance was proposed in February, and ever since, critics have raised concerns about the possible extradition of residents to mainland China. Oppositionists fear the communist nation lacks basic human rights protections that are in place in Hong Kong. How can that be, you ask? Isn't it all the same country? Well, to understand that, you must first understand Hong Kong's unique relationship with China. I'll explain a bit later on that, but first, let's just stay here and lay out what the protesters hope to accomplish. In the short term, it's pretty clear-cut. One of the principal organizers of the marches is a Hong Kong-based coalition called the Civil Human Rights Front. On its website, the organization describes itself as being, quote, composed of more than 50 civil society groups, including human rights, democracy, labor, grassroots, religion, culture, women, communities, minorities, sex work, and different sexual orientations, unquote. Now keep in mind, that is from a translation, a Google translation of their website from Chinese. The point is, the efforts to get people out into the streets and get the government's attention has groups that might otherwise be at odds with one another working together for the same goal. While many demonstrators in the streets sing hymns like Sing Hallelujah to the Lord, the owners of at least 2 prominent pornography internet businesses temporarily shut down their sites to display messages on their homepages in support of the protests. Now, one reason for the singing is that under Hong Kong's public order ordinance, religious get-togethers are exempt from the definition of a gathering or assembly and are thus more difficult for police to break up. However, a Catholic priest who spoke to Time after leading a round of hymns and Bible verses in a local park said, quote, the song is a very good way to express not just an emotion, but our desires in a peaceful, spiritual, religious way, unquote. He added that the tune spoke to everyone, regardless of their beliefs. Australian news has reported that in the days leading up to the first of these landmark protests on June 9th, a message on the This AV homepage encouraged users to attend the, quote, life or death protests instead of, quote, jerking off at home. This AV is one of the porn sites that I mentioned. Then you have the university student unions, who are also sending electronic posters to help get the word out and organize their actions using apps like Telegram that can support chat groups of up to 200,000 at a time. You can see one of the pictures that they have sent out on the website. All you have to do is go to the episode extras and click on the Hong Kong article, and you will be able to get in and see all these links that I keep referring to. While you're there, why don't you follow the podcast and the website? And heck, why not the Twitter and Facebook accounts too? That way you can keep track of all the things that we're doing going forward as well. All right, that's a different rabbit hole. Back to this one. This isn't the first time people in Hong Kong have protested. 5 years ago, massive protests against China's infringement on Hong Kong's freedoms and autonomy had little impact. This time, the strikes and demonstrations seem to be at least giving the legislature reason to pause. Since the protests began, the government postponed the vote on the bill, and authorities have issued public apologies, including 2 from the Beijing-appointed chief executive, Carrie Lam. You can listen to her whole statement on the website, but here's a couple excerpts from it. Quote, I personally have to shoulder much of the responsibility. This has led to controversies, disputes, and anxieties in society, Lam told reporters at a press conference. For this, I offer my most sincere apology to all people of Hong Kong. I have never spared any effort to serve the public, but this incident has made me realize that as the chief executive, I still have much to learn and must do better in balancing diverse interests, in listening more to all walks of life, in taking our society forward. Then she added, I truly hope that those injured can fully recover soon and that the rift in society can be quickly mended. Hong Kong is our home. It is only by walking together as one community and by standing closely connected that we can bring hope for Hong Kong, unquote. Okay, so at least on the surface, that sounds pretty good. You go out into the street and protest, and the leadership of your government comes out and says, I'm sorry, I should have listened to you. But Lam's apology was not enough to dissuade millions of Hong Kong's citizens from continuing to demonstrate. Delaying votes to disperse protests only then to quietly pass the law in the wee hours of darkness is a tactic the government has used in the past. So this time, protesters are, thus far, refusing to back down. At another recent press conference, a member of the Civil Human Rights Front went on camera to lay out the 5 main goals those demonstrating want to achieve. She said, the first goal is that the government not just postpone, but that it completely withdraw the extradition bill. Second, they want those who authorize the use of force against protesters by police to be held accountable. Third, they want the release of all arrested demonstrators, with all charges against them dropped. Fourth, they want the government to retract its characterizations that the ongoing events in the streets of Hong Kong are riots. The fifth demand is that they want the government's chief executive, Carrie Lam, to resign. It seems like the fifth demand is negotiable, though, because various student unions from universities across the city did not include it on a list of requirements that they put out. Oh my gosh, it is an undeniable fact. You can ask any sound person in the world, and they will tell you, you can try and find the quietest place on the planet, but as soon as you turn on a microphone, it is planes, trains, and automobiles, or at least this case, planes and ambulances or fire or police cars. I don't know what's going on up there, people, but it's loud. So if you hear it underneath, I'm sorry. Let's continue. We have to talk about, is this cause worth dying for? The call to keep China out of the territory's legal system is a cause Hong Kongers are willing to fight for, and at least in one instance so far, die for. On Saturday the 15th, before falling to his death, either accidentally or intentionally, it's not quite sure which it was, a 35-year-old protester gained an elevated position at Pacific Place. From the roof of a building at the well-known complex of office towers, hotels, and shops, he hung a banner that read, quote, "No extradition to China, total withdrawal of the extradition bill, we are not rioters, release the students and injured, Carrie Lam, step down, help Hong Kong," unquote. That is what he had on his sign that he hung from this building. The fire department came and set up a bag underneath him, and whether he missed it on purpose, they aren't sure. So this is really serious business. And while Lam apologized for the handling of both the extradition law and the protests, she says she will not resign or entirely scrap a vote on the postponed bill. She kept this stance even after close to 2 million people took to the streets on Sunday, June 16th. Instead, she says she wants another chance to rebuild people's trust in the government, and acknowledged that her work over the next 3 years will be difficult. So right now, Hong Kong is at a very dangerous impasse. Each time the demonstrators take to the streets, there are concerns that either they or the police will escalate the situation to violent ends. The student union groups in particular seem to be itching for a fight. For example, on the 12th, in response to police efforts to clear the area around the Legislative Council headquarters, protesters used barricades, water bottles, and bricks to push back while shielding themselves with umbrellas. Police retaliated with pepper spray, batons, and non-lethal shotgun rounds. The police, by the way, were completely outnumbered, and they were pushed back almost completely into the building at one point. If these protesters had been armed, they would have been in trouble, because from the footage I watched, only one of the police officers actually had a firearm of any kind, lethal or non-lethal. What onlookers are worried about is the mindset of the protesters that if they don't get what they want from the government, are they going to escalate in a way that sacrifices others or themselves? Australia's SBS news site has displayed screenshots from the internet that read things like, quote, "We go onto the street not because we have hope or we think more people will make our actions succeed. We know we need to do it no matter whether we shall succeed or not," unquote. Or then there's the quote, "Even a pig will scream before it is killed. Should we be killed but remain silent?" And finally, "It's time for you to spill your sweat and blood." Note that it says your. It's talking about them sacrificing themselves more than it is them attacking someone else. It's essential to understand that though based on British common law, the laws in Hong Kong are not the same as they are here in the United States. Even peacefully parading down a street or sitting in a courtyard without permission has the potential of destroying your life. In Hong Kong, any person who loiters in a public place or in the common parts of any building with an intent to commit an arrestable offense, not that you've actually done it, just intent, is liable to a fine of 10,000 Hong Kong dollars and imprisonment for 6 months. By the way, right now, $1 is equal to about 8 Hong Kong dollars. Being charged with involvement in a riot has even graver consequences. In Hong Kong, those convicted of rioting face a decade behind bars. On June 12th, as police began to use tear gas, rubber bullets, and beanbag rounds to disperse crowds who were occupying main streets in Admiralty, a business district on Hong Kong Island, both Police Commissioner Stephen Low and Chief Executive Carrie Lam initially called the protest a riot. That term means people could be facing decade-long prison terms. The commissioner said police made 32 arrests that day. 15 of them stand accused of violent crimes, 5 of which face charges for rioting. However, Lowe says police have received 34 complaints concerning that operation and that the department is looking into them. A lot of the people involved in these demonstrations don't have a lot of faith in that, though. So even though it is safer than protesting on China's mainland, marching for what you believe in Hong Kong is fraught with personal dangers, far more significant than here in the United States. You don't just get your mugshot taken, pay a fine, and return to work on Monday with a great story to tell. You could spend months or years in prison. So this is a big deal for these people. It takes a lot of courage to put everything you hold dear at risk to go out into the streets. That's why it was at least a small win for organizers when the police decided not to charge 8 people with loitering after arresting them during the June 12th protests against the extradition bill. According to a report in the Hong Kong Free Press, quote, "The 8, including 7 men and 1 woman, were unconditionally released. The police said there was not enough evidence to file charges against them after they conducted an investigation and sought legal advice," unquote. The article went on to say that Civic Party lawmaker Tanya Chang is warning protesters not to celebrate too early. She said that during the 2014 pro-democracy umbrella movement protests that she was involved in, she was arrested and unconditionally released twice. She was later arrested for a 3rd time in 2017 and charged with a different crime for her involvement in those earlier protests. On Facebook, she wrote, quote, "At a police station in 2015, police stopped me from meeting my lawyer on my own and refused to provide a written record. I know it sounds hard to believe, but it's true. I am not asking you to live in fear, but to know the reality, protect yourself, live your life," unquote. She was eventually sentenced to 8 months in prison. Earlier this month, it seems that sentence was suspended for 2 years as she is fighting a brain tumor. But it's examples like this that are why residents of Hong Kong fear their liberties will be infringed upon even further if the Fugitive Offender Ordinance passes. China is known far and wide for human rights violations. Often people who speak against the communist regime disappear into the system on trumped-up charges without due process. Right now, China is not allowed to do that to people in Hong Kong because Hong Kong has an entirely different legal system. You're saying, wait, what? Isn't Hong Kong Chinese? Well, if Hong Kong were trying to post its relationship status with China on social media, it would say it's complicated. Officially, yes, Hong Kong has been part of China since July 1st, 1997, when the British handed it back to the Chinese after ruling the island and surrounding territory for more than a century and a half. In 1839, Great Britain invaded China during the First Opium War to crush the emperor's opposition to British interference in his country's economic, social, and political affairs. In short, that is to say, England needed to keep and expand its opium trade there. Oh yeah. That's something that I learned about during another podcast that I did. One about opiums and big pharma, and this being the year of reckoning. I also learned about the opium wars. If you go to the website and listen to that episode, you can follow the links that'll give you the history of that. Fascinating stuff. One of Britain's first acts of that first opium war was to occupy Hong Kong. Now back then, it was a sparsely inhabited island off the coast of southeast China with nothing more really than an excellent harbor and location. As part of the treaty that ended the war, China ceded the island to England, and the new colonial trading post swiftly grew into an east-west commercial gateway and distribution center for all of southern China and beyond. Then in 1898, China granted Britain a lease to continue its rule over Hong Kong Island and its surrounding peninsula unimpeded for another 99 years. In the 1980s, as the contract started to draw to a close, the British negotiated an exit deal, whereby it would peacefully hand the territory back to China in exchange for a Chinese pledge to preserve Hong Kong's capitalist system. With the written promise that Hong Kongers would run Hong Kong for at least 50 years, the colony became the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region, SAR, or SAR. So, for the past 22 years, Hong Kong has navigated its way through a one country, two systems situation. It has its own currency, its own legal system, its own immigration process that includes its own passports. It also has an Olympic team, anthem, and flag. However, Chinese flags fly from government buildings, and though some representatives in the legislature are democratically elected, Beijing appoints the chief executive who runs the city. On an ancestral level, most Hong Kongers consider themselves Chinese. Most do not, however, consider themselves to be part of China. Yeah, like I said, the relationship is complicated. They've been operating like this for the past 22 years. So why is it blowing up now? Well, the fear of losing more freedom is what's driving nearly 28.5% of Hong Kong's entire population out into the streets. Think about it. Almost 2 million on a Sunday march go out, there's only 7 million in all of Hong Kong. We can't get 2 million people to agree on almost anything, let alone act together on it. But why is the government trying to push this through now? It seems it might boil down to timing and opportunity. Remember, despite Hong Kong's special status with China, Lam, the executive in charge of Hong Kong, is directly appointed by Beijing, and the territory's legislative council is dominated by lawmakers who are hand-picked by the Chinese Communist Party. So even though Lam gave public platitudes, it's highly unlikely she will completely capitulate to demonstrators' demands, even though they vow to escalate. Each side has far too much at stake. Anthony Kuhn is an NPR correspondent long based in Asia. I'm going to read you some excerpts from an article he posted on the 19th. Quote, Beijing has long perceived Hong Kong as a base for anti-communist subversives and a haven for fugitives from the mainland who often abscond with large sums of money. Initially, following the handover, China dealt with Hong Kong with a light touch because of the city's financial power. But a decade ago, as Western economies reeled from the 2008 financial crisis, other Chinese cities began catching up with Hong Kong. Hong Kong's economy, as a proportion of China's GDP, fell from 27% in 1993 to less than 3% in 2017. Beijing has worked to integrate Hong Kong, Macau, and the rest of the Pearl River Delta into an economic mega-region. Chinese leaders argued that as demand from Western markets dried up, Hong Kong's best bet was to bind itself more closely to mainland China markets. These developments strengthened the hand of China's leader Xi Jinping as he consolidated power, silenced dissenting voices, modernized the military, and extended the country's global reach through diplomacy and infrastructure projects. Again, that was quoting Anthony Kuhn from NPR. By the way, I learned about his reference to infrastructure projects when I was doing another podcast about the Caribbean. It was about storm recovery and dealing with things like sargassum seaweed coming in and disrupting these small Caribbean countries. What happens is China is going in and offering to rebuild the roads and bridges that have been wiped out, say, from a hurricane. And in turn, they're hoping that they will then turn a little more towards their worldview, communism. And it's not just happening on the other side of the world. It's happening right below us in the Caribbean. Oh, and you can check that out by listening to the Caribbean Roulette podcast. It will tell you a little bit about it, and it'll give you links to a couple of other articles that talk about it. I'm just full of side notes today, aren't I? All right, back to our main topic. Hong Kong's government says that the proposed extradition law came not because of China, no, but because of a murder in Taiwan involving 2 Hong Kong citizens. Evidently, a couple went to Taiwan for Valentine's Day. He came back. She ended up dead in Taiwan. Now they want him back to try him, and they don't have the law set up to extradite. Leadership has said the bill is necessary for Hong Kong to gain respect from other countries that see the SAR as a haven for criminals. There could be some legitimacy to that claim, but it seems people are more concerned with the other side, the downside. On the 20th, Evan Fowler, a columnist and co-director of the Hong Kong Free Press, wrote, quote, "However, the need for a mechanism to allow persons to be legally extradited to a regime known for its arbitrary and politicized legal system must be weighed against the risk this poses not only to the person, but also to the rule of law in Hong Kong." Unquote. Fowler went on to write that because Beijing appoints Hong Kong's chief executive and Hong Kong exists purely by Beijing's grace, it is not politically feasible to see a situation where Hong Kong would refuse any extradition request from China. Fowler, like others, believes China is actively using its own laws to remove any domestic opposition. He feels China is systematically purging labor rights lawyers, social activists, intellectuals, journalists, and people within the Communist Party itself that do not agree with leadership. Therefore, he fears there is no reason to believe that if given the opportunity, Beijing will not do the same in Hong Kong. Anthony Kuhn agrees. He wrote that, quote, when the one country, two system policy expires in 2047, it seems Beijing intends to take control of a city that has already been tamed and emptied of any serious resistance, unquote. That may be China's plan, but it's not there yet. They haven't completely executed it. That's why people are going out and marching. Right now, Hong Kong stands untamed and resistant. Fowler believes the lesson in Hong Kong that both China and the rest of the world should heed is that, quote, all authority reliant on oppression is only ever a wisp away from revolution, unquote. July 1st will mark the 22nd anniversary of Hong Kong's 1997 handover to China, and plans for another massive rally on that day are well underway. At this point, the world can only watch to see what happens next. So that's the gist. This story is going to continue to evolve, so we might need to revisit it. In fact, I think the next episode will be a series of updates on those topics that we covered during the first year. If you like that idea, let me know. We've got through the first year. I still feel like I'm feeling my way around exactly how formal or casual this podcast should be. Do you like the rabbit holes, or do you want me to just stick to one subject at a time? Do you like being more conversational, or do you want it to be more newsy? I can do both. I can do either or both. Weigh in. Tell me what you think. I would love to hear from you. Until then, agree or disagree. It's okay, because I'm just saying.